Welcome, everyone, to the March 12th, 2025 meeting of the Liberty Lake Planning Commission. Welcome, everyone. Let's have a roll call, please.
Joe Mann,
Here.
Tom Solberg,
Here.
Jim Baumker,
Here.
DG Garcia,
Here.
Charlie Jenks,
Here.
Dale Robbins, Phil Foyer,
Here.
Gene Bushel, and Troy Mullenix.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Would you please stand and join me in the pledge to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Commissioner Robbins is not here. Could I have a motion to excuse him, please?
Move to excuse.
Second.
Second, motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Review of the agenda. Everybody had a chance to look through the agenda. Any additions or changes to the agenda? Motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes from our February 26th meeting. Everybody have a chance to review those? Any changes or errors? Motion to approve.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
On the second page, there's a long paragraph discussing the meeting we had on the housing element. Begins with discussion amongst Director Key and the commissioners. It isn't a correction to this, but the question is, will we get a summary? Because we discussed and voted on issues. Will we get a summary of what happened during the course of that meeting?
Beyond minutes, do you have a summary? Well, we have, it was recorded,
Okay,
so you can always review the recording. But other than that, no, not to my knowledge.
because there were specific items in the discussion of the matrix we discussed and voted on. And I was just wondering if there would be something coming out that would summarize the actions taken on those items.
That's a good question, because I noticed Director Key made notes on every
Yes.
comment that we did. So I know she's got a record of it. So I'm assuming we would
Okay,
at some point,
Okay.
but I don't know that for a fact. Amy, do you know?
Bringing the housing stuff back at the next meeting when Lisa's here, and they'll be going through the conversation that we had and what they took from that and the suggestions that they got from that. But as far as like a written summary, the minutes and then the recording are
Okay.
what we'll do with that.
perfect. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you, Commissioner.
And typically in those follow-up presentations, aren't the changes redlined? So
Okay. Commissioner Mullins?
Yeah, in the part where it says, some members of the commission strongly oppose changes within the established neighborhood zones. Is it supposed to say in the minutes which members those were?
Not unless there's a vote, to my knowledge.
Okay. Okay,
As I understand it, under Robert's rules, if there's a vote, then it should.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Motion to approve? Motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We'll go move into our workshops. We have our city manager with us. Thank you and welcome, sir, Mr. McAvoy, to discuss the economic development elements for our comprehensive plan.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. I believe that you have a red line version of the chapter in your packet. And so I'm going to be referring to that. But I also believe we have some slides. And so what you see in front of you, chapter 10 is labeled as chapter 10, which is the economic development chapter in the comprehensive plan. And we're proposing some changes, which you can see in the red line version there. And this is a fairly short chapter. But you'll see as we get deeper into it, I'm going to recommend that you consider recommending that we make some changes to it. And before I start with this, I want to give you just a bit of a connection point with our current strategic plan. And if you're looking at it from kind of a hierarchical perspective, the comprehensive plan is going to sit on top. It's got the longest time horizon and it has the most robust kind of policy directed statements. And then the strategic plan is typically a shorter time horizon. In our case, it's 5 years. But our vision in the strategic plan says, together we make a welcoming and flourishing community united by the pursuit of enriching the quality of life for every resident, planning growth that respects our natural environment, and promoting a vibrant economy. So we've got the economic development portion of that, or at least a focus on economics and by extension, economic development in the vision statement for the city. And then we have one of the pillars or priorities of the strategic plan is the economic vibrancy and opportunity, where we've got some key results that we're reporting on. So this is an important chapter. It's an important concept. It's one of the foundations of focus that we undertake here as a city government. And so it's not an unimportant chapter, but it is a short chapter. And so one of the first things that I wanted to do is point out that, and you'll see this going forward as each of these elements is presented, we've, from the previous version, taken the policies from the initial chapter and moved them into the element chapters. And so as you're looking at chapter 10 here, you're going to see economic development policies labeled 1 through 14. Those are not in chapter 10 of the current comprehensive plan. And so we're moving those into each element chapter. So you'll see that as a common theme going forward. What I would propose, or what the proposed edits are, is that I just mentioned. And then we're specifically enumerating some economic development partners that are different from the last iteration of this plan. And those are namely due to name changes of the organizations more than adding new organizations into the mix. And you'll see that redlined in there. And then we've expanded the section on tourism, and that's become a more potent, more important part of our economic development strategy, is focusing on tourism-driven or producing activities. And so, Evan, if you can go to the next slide. One of the things that I would, as you're looking through this and you're making final decisions on what you want to include in the new version of the comprehensive plan, I would recommend that you make some consideration into the following options. And that is, as I've mentioned, making an explicit statement in there to align the comprehensive plan with the city's strategic and operational plan, so that these policies and objectives are carried through those documents. And that would be something that staff would have to purposefully undertake as the strategic plan and the annual budget were updated on an annual basis. And then I would also suggest maybe considering putting some language in there about sustainable funding sources to promote the partnerships. The city council, as you may remember, stripped out some funding for an economic development agreement with Greater Spokane this year. And so that has limited us in our ability to partner with Greater Spokane Inc. in some of the economic development opportunities or programs that in the past we would have been able to take advantage of. And then maybe some specific language on focusing on drivers of economic development. And so when I think of economic development, obviously you have sort of the traditional tenets of business retention and growth and creation, and those are important and we should preserve those, and those are in here explicitly called out. But I would suggest maybe making some more direct links to other things that promote economic development, like infrastructure preservation and public safety and amenities and those kinds of things. And those are implied. There's shadows of those in this chapter, but maybe some more explicit calling out of those things, because those are really drivers of economic development activity in any community, and ours is no different. And so you'll see the rest of the proposed changes as you look through the red line version. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, but that's a fairly concise summary of what we're proposing in this chapter for you to consider. And you'll have another opportunity to see these things. We're not expecting final decisions at this workshop, but certainly to generate any conversation or to answer any questions, again, I'll be happy to do any of those things.
Any questions? Yeah, I got a few. Thanks for coming.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
When you go down the list of, there's items 5 through 14, economic development policy.
Yes.
You, in economic development policy 8, you talk about contingency plans for the possible loss of any of the employers in the city. What would those plans look like?
What would the contingency plans look like?
Yeah.
And so those would be, for example, you would have typically, as an example, if STCU decided to pull up roots and move out of town, we would want to have some, and this would be in partnership with our economic development partners, right? We would want to have some discussions about what are potential replacements for that kind of footprint, because there's a facility that they have out on Mission, right? So we would want to know already what some potential replacements for that kind of activity are. Now, that doesn't mean that we would be going out and recruit, Plan B. But contingency plans in this context are just kind of more like for like geographic footprint. What business gaps or what gaps do we have in existing businesses? If this happened, what would we need to support it? Those kinds of scenario planning things that would be in a contingency plan. And I don't know that we have any of these already developed, but that would be what I would expect to see in any kind of contingency planning. The number of jobs that would be affected and how we would propose to replace that number of jobs, those kinds of things.
There's a policy that talks about, oh, it's 14, maintain an inventory of usable industrial and commercial land that is sufficient to meet projected demand and encourage marketability of the city. Well, the city is pretty much, as I look at it, aerially built out. Now, there is some industrial land to the east. And there are some parcels that aren't necessarily used, that are developed, that aren't used to their maximum utility, in my opinion, that maybe could be used for housing. So there's a fence around what we've already got. So how would you maintain that availability without expanding the city boundaries, annexing additional land, et cetera?
Right. And so that this policy may be something that you want to consider changing to focus more on, less on, say, industrial and more on just a mix of economic development, things that would allow us to maintain the vibrancy of the economy. Maybe focus less on a sector and more on a mix that meets the community's needs or something like that.
Can you tell me what a living wage is?
I'm not running for office, so yeah.
I'm not getting that benefit.
Yeah, so a living wage typically in economic development terms is something like 60% of the AMI, something that you can pay your bills, your rent, your transportation, your food, your medical care, those kinds of things, and have some left over. I don't know what the current number is in this in our county, but that would essentially be the definition.
So in that vein, do you see the city to help support achieving a living wage for people who live and work here? Do you see at any time in the future the city getting into the business of things like rent control?
I can't speak for the council. I would not recommend anything like a rent control measure.
that's a way to get to that.
I-
Living wage.
I would argue that it's not, but I mean, potentially you have a lot of different levers that you can pull to do different things. And the council would have to be at the forefront of kind of assessing any of those kinds of potential recommendations and looking at impacts, unintended consequences, and then coming up with some kind of mix of treatments. But that certainly could be something that some future council could consider. In fact, there's a bill that's clinking around the legislature right now that is addressing rent control, and I believe it made it past. I believe it made it out of the House. I'll have to check that, but I believe it did.
I wouldn't be shocked at that.
Yeah.
Frankly, it doesn't surprise me. But is that a bill that would affect us statewide or just in certain areas?
My understanding is the statewide application. I would have to look at the details of the bill. I mean, I admittedly don't know those, but I believe it's statewide application.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other
Yeah.
questions? Yes.
Question, this is on, let's see. This is, history and background. And this is about,
We're gonna go, I'm gonna do a presentation on that in a little bit.
we're gonna do what?
We're gonna do another presentation on that specific
There,
chapter.
there's a section within
Yeah.
this element that's called history and background. Is that what you're talking about, Jim?
No,
Sorry, my mistake.
no, it's, maybe that's a misnomer, but it's
Paragraph
something,
C, yeah.
something called infill and redevelopment.
Yeah.
I had a question about that.
Okay.
So is this okay, so I'm just gonna read it. It says infill and redevelopment programs provide an economic development tool to revitalize underutilized or vacant parcels or structures. So first question, do you have any idea what the vacancy rate is today for underutilized? I'm assuming we're talking commercial structures.
That would be my assumption.
Do we know what it is?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
So then, infill development would develop or redevelop vacant commercial or industrial structures or parcels of land that are already provided with services. Redevelopment policies would help utilize existing structures before constructing new commercial or industrial buildings. So this whole thing about infill and redevelopment, does that apply to the city of Liberty Lake and their desire to build new structures?
So this would be focused on, I believe the intent of that statement is developing a strategy or preserving a strategy where instead of, say, going out and finding fallow ground, if there was an opportunity to redevelop an existing commercial site into another commercial activity, that would be preferable. But that would be something that the planning commission can make some recommendations on, maybe making that language more concise, or not concise, but more specific.
Just questioning, the city council has talked about structures for a community center and
Mhm.
library, and the proposals I saw were to build new structures. And this paragraph here with respect to infill development would say redevelopment policies would utilize existing structures before constructing new commercial or industrial buildings. I just wondered, does that apply to the city itself, or is that just for commercial interests?
Well, it would apply to the city itself if we were dealing with a commercial enterprise. That statement specifically is focused on commercial development.
So it's not applicable for city development of like a community center or city hall or something like that? You would encourage them to look at existing structures?
Wouldn't necessarily say I wouldn't encourage them. It would not necessarily be a commercial activity that we're looking
Well,
at.
no, it's not. I completely agree. It's not a commercial activity, but it's infill and redevelopment. So I'm a little bit perplexed there.
Sure. Well, a good parallel example would be the purchase of Legacy Church to develop a city project. And that would be an example of infill development. We weren't knocking the structure down and rebuilding it, but we were reusing an existing structure. That was the proposal in the plan. So that would be an example of infill redevelopment.
Okay.
Other questions?
I would just suggest that on that same paragraph, infill and redevelopment, you add the term underutilized properties, because there are underutilized properties in this city that, and we've talked about them on Mission with regard to future residential development on them. I would add underutilized in here as well. Just as a suggestion.
Okay.
All right.
It says it right there. Am I reading that wrong? It says infill redevelopment programs provide an economic development tool to revitalize underutilized or vacant parcels or structures.
First sentence.
Revitalized, underutilized,
Or vacant, there should
Fair
be a
enough.
comma there, should be a
Fair enough.
comma.
Yes,
scratch what I said.
Okay. Sorry.
perfect.
I withdraw that.
Anyone else?
I just have a comment on.
Yes, sir.
Or do you have more, Mark, to share?
I don't have more presentation,
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
just-
happy to field any
I was
questions
just
you
gonna
have.
make a comment that, I always appreciate the red lines. Red lines that are proposed, I have no issues with. Are you looking for a motion on something like that or just a verbal? I have no issues with that. Because aren't we gonna take this document and move to the next step with it?
We are, and I'm going to rely on staff to describe what the next steps are.
Do you want a motion for the red lines right now? That's my question.
I don't think we should because we haven't gone through them.
Are we gonna go through each one line for line? I was under the impression that we came prepared and we were talking about the whole document.
Well, you know, what happens is we get stuck in a spot where we need clarification that we come back to sometimes. So if we're all clear, then we don't think we need to revisit any of that again to make sure we have everything.
That's,
Cleaned out.
you're right, but my impression is we went from the first page to infill redevelopment and there's no more after that. So that's why it was, now's the time for.
I'm not gonna suggest you take a course of action or not take one. It's you all's decision to do that. What I would do though is consider or recommend that you consider making some language adjustments as we've just talked about. And you're free to reject that recommendation, right? It's the planning commission's prerogative on that, but
One other question.
Yes, sir.
You refer to an appendix X. It says-
which paragraph are you in, Jim?
Last one says it's a red line. It says inventory of available.
Yeah.
Commercial, industrial lands within the city is provided in appendix X. Where is it?
So I think what that is intended to mean is that once all of these appendices get numbered as this document gets finalized, that will be recorded here and whatever that's going to be will be filled into that slot.
So right now, there is no appendix. There is no listing of inventory of available commercial and industrial lands.
Or if there is, we don't have a specific appendix number associated with it.
Well, I would just say the appendix, whatever you end up with, it should be an inventory of available commercial and industrial lands and buildings. And
Okay.
maybe when you talk about buildings, maybe you have to specifically more. What do you mean by available commercial industrial buildings? Would that be underutilized? Would it be a certain vacancy rate? I think that would be good data to have in an appendix.
So do you happen to know how we're defining available?
I don't know that we have a succinct definition yet for that. I know that this is something that Lisa was looking at as part of our implementation. So this is a document that she's looking to
Gotcha.
develop after we get through the comp plan portion of it. And you're right, the appendix X is just, we're gonna have a litany of appendices to this document. And so
Gotcha.
once we get them, we'll label them A, B, C, D, E. And so this is just kind of a place.
So X just is just a placeholder, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just thinking maybe there is an appendix that's out there, but no, it's not.
We will have lots and lots.
But then my recommendation would be is that in addition to industrial lands, it also includes or expand. You say industrial commercial buildings that are, however you want to define underutilized. Maybe it's
Underutilized,
just-
we do have a definition for it. We have underutilized land in our land capacity analysis. We don't necessarily get into underutilized buildings, but I think that we could parse that out.
Be maybe some percentage capacity of the building, something like that. Because I'll just make a general comment, and I agree, I think it's important, but I think it's a bad look to have a lot of vacant buildings hanging around the city. I just don't think that's a good look for the city. And so to have an understanding of what the vacancies are, and then have as part of a development plan to try to get those vacancies occupied.
Right, so that, on the getting them occupied piece, that would be where we would be working with partners, obviously, but like, for example, things like property management codes and other things, so that they don't become or don't get into a state of disrepair while that transition is occurring.
Right.
Those would be things that we would be directly focused on.
Yeah.
So Commissioner Foyer, did you make that a motion?
We don't need to.
Okay,
It sounds like we're gonna revisit this again for, what sounds like we have some edits. I'm assuming Amy's taking.
I am. I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on the considerations that Mark has suggested.
That was my next
Oh.
comment, now that we've got that out of the way. So help me understand a little better of the connection between your suggested considerations and this document.
So I didn't want to make just a unilateral, I didn't want to supply the language and just say, hey, adopt this. But I'm thinking sprinkled throughout here, you've already got sections that kind of address some of these things. For example, you've got tools and strategies and you've got, well, tools and strategies specifically, sustainable regional economic development, and some others. Maybe some rearrangement of the wording to just explicitly call out those elements, particularly that the city has direct influence over as a economic development driver, infrastructure development and preservation, partnership with educational institutions, public safety, amenities. Those are the things that attract people to live here, that then thereby attract employers to want to tap into those, into that labor force. We also have a labor force section. So maybe it's a combination of just beefing up some of those descriptions to include the specific economic development drivers that the city directly controls. But I would rely on the commission to supply some of that wording.
I think that you probably don't want us supplying wording for something that we're not as well trained as staff is to. And so to support what staff comes up with, what you propose, whether it's in a strategic plan or the connection to those things, I think then we take a look at that. But if you want us to start
So
in our own words on those, I think that might be a little dangerous.
So would then the counter recommendation be for staff to come up with some suggested language?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's what I would think.
That we can do that.
And the way that this commission has worked is that's, you don't want us writing.
Well, we'll never get it done.
That's
Sure.
right.
Well, that's why we suggested it. We wanted to just throw you into a do loop and
Well, between you and Amy and Lance and Lisa, I think
Yeah.
we have some.
just wanted to reserve your next 2 years worth of meetings.
Other questions, comments? Yeah, I do agree. I think this deserves a revisit and to go through some of this and perhaps in a little more detail. I'm kind of like Commissioner Foyer. I don't see a whole lot here to object to
No, I'm more
from what I
interested,
see.
I'm more interested in what that consists of, and I totally agree with Tom that I didn't come prepared to from just off the hip to give you recommendations on that.
And we weren't expecting that to be done off the hip.
Sure.
But understanding kind of the dynamic, we can absolutely put together some suggested language and run that past you.
All right.
Certainly put my thinking cap on, but you're smarter than I am. Yeah.
Other comments?
Does that
Questions?
answer your question, Amy?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. We shall move on to Mr. Mueller.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So I'm here today to talk about the cultural and historical research resources chapter. So I was recommended to speak with some people on the Parks and Arts Commission to kind of get some input from them on some history. And so I had a meeting with Laura Frank and David Himbaugh. Both of them said that I should speak with Ross Schneidmiller, that he's kind of the local historian here. So so I had a meeting with him, and also all three of them mentioned that for this chapter, we should include history outside the city limits because it's important to the overall area of Liberty Lake. So that's some direction from them. Evan, you want to go move forward? Okay. So at the goals and policies for this chapter are, I believe, in chapter 2, and we're going to move those from chapter 2 directly into this chapter. So these are just a list of them. There's no changes to the goals. If you go to the next slide, there is a change to policy number 2. That policy is to identify those lands which are most likely to contain unrecorded archaeological or historic sites. I'm proposing we eliminate that because I don't know how we would get that done. And so it's important to note this chapter was pretty much written in 2003 when we did our original comprehensive plan. There's been very minimal changes to it. I don't believe this has ever been done since it was adopted. So I'm trying to go for a less is more approach and remove that. Next slide, there we go. The next change would be to policy 5. Whenever appropriate, the city and other entities shall incorporate recognition of the past into the new built environment. I don't really know what that means. So I was proposing we eliminate that. And again, these are all up for discussion. So if there's anybody who would like to keep it, please let me know.
I agree. I'm not sure what that means either.
Yeah. Okay, for policy number 6, I'm also proposing we eliminate that one. That is to periodically review and update the incentives and strategies to encourage historic preservation. We don't provide incentives, so I don't know why this policy needs to be there if we don't provide those incentives.
I have a question, Mr.
Mhm.
Chair. If I may.
Wait.
Does the state provide any direction on historic preservation, whether it be structures or archaeological or paleontological finds?
Well, there's the National Register. I don't know about local, like state-wise. But to be like on a national register, I think it has to be, a
Sure.
structure has to be 50 years old. There's also some changes I'm going to propose at the end where essentially though, just because something's old doesn't necessarily mean it's historic. There has to be some kind of uniqueness to it. Something, an event happened there, somebody famous lived there or important lived there, or it's a specific type of architecture, and it's a great example of that architecture. Those are usually what require it to be on the historic register. But I don't know of anything state-wise for that.
Any criteria have they developed any criteria that you need to use for identifying or preserving resources?
No, nothing that I've been made aware of, but I can do some more research on that.
Is it a
Kind of on your
age-
own.
Is it an age thing? X number of years old becomes a.
Minimum is.
Yeah, minimum of
like
50 years.
Years
A lot of
or.
times,
Mhm.
50 years or older.
And the Washington State Historical Society just isn't connected to any legislative action
Yeah.
at this point. And then it's up to each individual entity.
So you're
Is that-
kind of on your own.
You are, we
Yes.
are,
Maybe that's a good.
and we're not old enough.
Yeah, and that's kind of something we run into too. It's not really a lot within the city limits. That's all that old. A lot of it lies outside the city limits. Mhm. So for policy number 7, I'm just pointing out, this is where we provide a program of public education concerning the need to preserve and incorporate cultural resources and keep the public informed of actions to carry out plans. I'm working on a story map that is about historical places within the city and outside the city. And I think that could be a tool that we could use to do this meet this policy.
Isn't Parks and Arts already starting on doing that for some of the artistic things that are around here in the?
They might have,
So that would be possible that they might,
yeah,
Be a
I'll ask them
resource.
if they have any kind of GIS info.
I know that Laura and Ross both are very interested in that.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Okay, so policy 8, develop and promote a program which encourages property owners to donate cultural resources to agencies or organizations that will preserve them in perpetuity. I was proposing to eliminate it. We don't have anybody that manages that. Going through this chapter, a lot of this sounds like maybe the city had an idea of having like a historic preservation office at one point. I think you need something like that to manage a lot of that. So unless we're kind of willing to go that route, I was going to eliminate it. And also for policy number 9, we don't do a floor area ratio here at the city. So just removing that aspect of that policy. That's fine. Okay, and now into the meat of the chapter here. In speaking with Mr. Schneider, a lot of these changes are going to be from him, where he's done additional research since 2003 to get the details a little bit more accurate. This, I just highlighted it because he referenced some book I should read to get this story correct. So it's going to require me doing some more research to get this paragraph correct. So we'll just go through and change a few details based on his comments.
Lance, I love the series that Ross did and was in 8 or a whole series of a year.
Yeah.
On the splash. But is that something that we're gonna, do we need it verbatim, including stories? Or do we need historic events and specific cultural?
Yeah. Well, I have been made aware that the splash articles, and I've looked through them. I'm going to be using those a lot more for the story map.
There you go.
Yeah.
As opposed to a document.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, next slide. Again, this is just the location of this was made more accurate for the train stop.
I have a question on that. So, not that I anticipate it will happen, but if True Legends changes names, does that mean we change this document?
That's a good question. I can, instead of using True Legends, maybe replace that with intersection.
So trust me, I know where the place is.
Oh, I understand. Yeah.
For a beer.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I wouldn't say we'd have to change it, but I mean, the next go around, if it had not, if True Legends had been renamed, we could rename it. But I think it'd be fine just doing an intersection. He just mentioned True Legends in his email, so I just,
Can you use a street address or a parcel?
yeah, I could do something like that, or a near a road intersection.
The northwest corner of
Yeah.
Mission and Harvard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can do that. No problem.
Barry's gonna want that on there though.
Next slide. Again, this is all just from Mr. Schneimiller. He told me there weren't that many resorts, so I just took it out. The dance pavilion, the fire was in the 50s, not the 60s, but it was torn down in the 60s. And then some of the resorts were closing in the 60s versus the 70s, so we just changed that to the 60s. Next slide. And again, all these are in your packet here. Yep. If you want to go through them. And let's see. he asked specifically, Mr. Schneidler, to have the Schneidler Lane Company removed from this chapter. So that's why the sentence was rewritten, to remove that and just reword it. Nothing major. Next slide. So, the tribe really isn't mentioned in this chapter except for the very first paragraph. So the tribe was here way back in the day, and so we wanted to make sure that they were included in reference here. So that's why they're added to this. Oh yeah.
That's the Coeur d'Alene tribe
Oh,
site of the horses. That's where they were massacred.
oh
We
yeah.
have a memorial. It is in our city limits too.
Okay, I'm gonna put that. I'll make a note of that. Okay, next slide. Albertsons is now Safeway, so we changed that. I took out the reference to light rail. It could happen. I know back when this was written in 2003, there was a big push for the light rail. It's kind of since died down. I just didn't think it needed to be included, so I removed that.
Same question on Safeway as True Legends.
Sure. I mean, it did change and we're changing it.
I don't care either way. If we're willing to change the document, if something changes, I'm just,
Yeah, I mean, I think,
we should be
I
treated each equally. So if you want to stick with True Legends and Safeway.
yeah,
I don't have a
I mean, I could say the grocery store,
preference.
on the east side of Liberty Lake Road. Just that everybody kind of knows Safeway real well. And so, I mean,
Not everybody that's reading this document is going to know that though.
that's
You
true.
just identify by location.
Okay,
Because
we'll
By
remove that.
2046, these things will change.
Sure.
And it's been named everything out of the hat.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, we'll fix that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're now just updating the names of some of these developments that weren't named prior when this document was initially written, and now they are. So we're just including those names in there. Okay. The legend tree has since been removed. So the reason I meant, I know it could be controversial, but I took it out because it's also, I don't know where, there's not a memorial to it there, so there's no place for anybody to go visit.
There was mourning when it was taken out.
Mhm, Yeah.
People that have been around here for a while were,
Sure.
It's on private property too.
Yeah, exactly. It's not accessible to the public. And then we'll update the map that references it as well, saying that it'll point out where it was, but that it's no longer existing. Okay. Next slide. Okay.
The homeowner would prefer not to have an address published.
Yeah, there won't be an address. It'll just be a big dot somewhere, on the map, so they won't quite see it. Okay, so this is towards the end of the chapter here. It points out kind of what actions staff will take moving forward. And to me, I wanted to streamline this a little bit and make it something we could manage as staff. This again, that what was crossed out was more like if we had a historic preservation officer, which we don't. So I do think we could identify historic properties, come up with a process if someone would like a property added to our inventory. Then we'll, have a policy where we'll try to keep these and make sure that these properties are maintained in good condition, and the information is accessible. Again, that where the information is accessible will be that story map or a GIS layer that we'll have available to the public, so everybody can identify, go online, see where the properties are at, and then make, if they would like to propose changes, they can. Next
like
slide.
your streamlining.
Yeah, thank you. And again, this is just the continuation of that. Are there any proposed changes to this new portion of it? Okay. Next slide. And then that's the last part. I think you go to the very last slide of that. So, okay, so these are not necessarily in the red lines, but this is for when I'm rewriting the chapter. updating the chapter. There's some changes I want to make. So both Laura Frank and David Himbaugh thought that we could talk more about how the city came about as far as becoming a city and corporation. When this was written in 2003, that was brand new. Now, once we adopt this plan, it'll be 25 years old, the city, and we should probably reference that. So I'll add some information there. I'm also working on a map, another story map for annexation. If there's any other properties that we have not identified that we'd like to add in here, we can go ahead and add those. And I also want to add into this chapter, some information talking about why something's historical, that it's not necessarily just because it's old. An example I came up with was, if a Ford Aerostar van, I don't know that it's going to be a classic car in 50 years. It's a car, but it's not a classic car. So there needs to be something unique about the property in order to be historic.
I have one. There's nothing unique. I also have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vanagon was better than Aerostar by far.
So anyways, those are the changes I'd like to make going forward. I was kind of more looking just for feedback on if you agree with those or if there's some other route we should go.
Comments, ladies and gentlemen?
Just, Mr. Chair, just one. The paragraph that's at the top of the second page begins with the land patent on May 26, 1888, I'm sorry. I read this document and I got to this paragraph. My eyes kind of glazed over. And my first question was, why is this in here? I'm not quite sure. I think you could probably do the same thing with maybe fewer words. Condense it.
Where are you?
So yeah, where are we at on this?
Yeah, you want
On
to
this
look right
page?
there.
No, land patent.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Page 33.
A lot of detail in it.
Sure.
Maybe you could summarize it a better way. I don't know. Just seem like, okay.
Oh, I see.
Condense it. Yeah. Sure.
But this is definitely the way that Ross reads.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the only comment.
Yeah, I think the issue of who owned what specific legal definition parcel, I'm not sure of the significance of that to the history of the city.
Well, I don't know. I appreciated the names on the map.
The names, I
like
don't disagree,
Yeah,
that
but
the families that homesteaded here, I think should be recognized, but
Sure.
the specific, the south one half of the
Mhm.
northwest parcel, is that really, nobody's gonna be able to find that anyway.
You wanna
Yeah.
get rid of the legal description.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
down a legal.
We could get
description.
rid of the legal description, and just say some early settlers.
Yeah, I'd
area
just
where-
eliminate the legal descriptions.
Okay. Yep.
And I love this stories, Lance, and I think that
Mhm.
Russ tells them better than anybody, but when I first sat down with him, it took 4 hours for him to get done. And I mean, take a breath.
Yeah.
And in here, I think the more you streamline and the more you reference with a footnote,
Mm,
if it's important to tell the story, here's where they can find the story. But the whole story doesn't need to be in the comp plan.
sure.
Is there an inventory or a listing of historical structures?
I haven't seen one that we've maintained, so that's something that we
Parks and Arts
will.
was gonna work.
we'll-
Parks and Art, we're gonna work on that. They're gonna, we started with the artwork and some of the things that we have that are around the city. Their points of interest, and it's gonna be in a story map type thing, so I think that'd be the perfect place to do
I
it.
just
Yeah.
have an observation, maybe. The only historical building I can think of is that Liberty Lake Golf Clubhouse. I mean,
Yeah.
it is,
Yes.
what, it's 50 years old.
Yeah.
And it is kind of I mean, we don't, the city doesn't own, it's owned by the county, but it's kind of a classic, you know what I'm saying?
Until they tear it down and build a new one, yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering about something like that. That's,
The pavilion is probably the closest to.
I think some of these other buildings that have been called out are what you're looking for on a list.
list, yeah.
Mhm.
Right, right.
And the, what are you calling it, the story map?
Yeah, it's a story map. Yeah.
I think that's gonna check all those boxes.
Okay.
Well,
Just my opinion.
can you go to that slide? I have a link here to actually show you it's a draft format right now, the story map, but you can kind of see what it's going to look like. And then it's very simple to add another property to that. So
Yeah.
just scroll down. Yeah, you'll
Okay.
see them on the left and you can click on,
Oh, perfect,
one of them on the
perfect.
left and it brings you right to it. And you can scroll through pictures and things like that. So that's, I think, how I would, we can have an Excel sheet inventory and then this to actually see, where these are geographically.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
But in
Great.
terms of existing or structures that haven't been demolished, are there any? I'm just,
Like old structures. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Rocky Hill, the Domrey's, I think barn is
Yeah,
that
okay.
one.
Oh, yeah.
Domrey's lump site. There's another one, Sig's Resort.
And some of these are referenced the Washington Historical Registry.
Mhm,
So-
mhm.
okay.
So you're not capturing any, is it the Mission Church? Is that what it is?
Well, yeah, it's a little farther down, and so I think that's another question to be, how far from the city limits do we want to go
Right.
for capturing these properties?
I had my honeymoon at Sandy Beach Resort. We're keeping it.
Yeah, that one's on there.
Right. It seems to me the basic criterion should be if it had some sort of impact on the formation and the existence of this city, then it should be recognized, no matter where it is
A good man.
or how far out it might be. If it had some kind of impact,
Sure.
Which would include Orthos Orchards and Green Acres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Not the Mission Church. What is it? Am I drawing a blank? Was it dance hall at one point?
any other
It doesn't matter.
questions, issues, concerns, comments?
I think it looks good.
I appreciate the work you've
I
done.
really
Thank you.
appreciate having it in here.
Yeah, thank you.
A lot of these things are so dry and.
Mm-hmm.
Pass along our thanks to Mr. Schneidmiller as well.
Will
I
do.
appreciate that.
Yep.
Any other comments? Thank you. We'll move on to citizen comments. We have any citizens online? Thank you, Evan. Seeing none, we will move on to reports. Secretary's report.
The only thing I have to report is you'll notice in the back of your packet, our schedule has changed a bit. And I am actively working on changing it again, so it will be different the next time you get a packet, but it's just gonna keep moving as new opportunities come up and as we get new information, then we'll update the schedule to keep things moving forward.
Thank you. We'll move on then to commissioner reports. Commissioners, any reports?
I'll just tack on to Amy's, not mentioning it again, the CPAP meeting. The Climate Policy Advisory Team is moving. We've had our second meeting. We're gonna have our third in about a week from tomorrow, I think. And again, the kids from Ridgeline are amazing. And I think they're gonna come here and I hope you get a chance to see some of the things they're coming up with.
Cool.
And then we may be invited to see, they create a city, they plan a city in teams and they have to use the entire library to do it. And I think, I'm pretty sure we're all gonna be invited to see that. It's amazing what they come up with.
Cool. I have one thing real quickly. I've been doing the reports to the city council. Periodically, we don't do them consistently, just whenever we have something to report. If any one of you would like to do those reports, I'd encourage you to do that, to let us know that you would like to do it. Particularly if you want any visibility with the city council, which maybe you don't, I don't know, but if you do, or if you just want the opportunity to do that, please let us know. The chair does not have to do those every time, just so you'll know. So
You're doing a great job.
you have
I do have something.
yes, sir.
I want to share. I'm glad Mark came back to the room. I don't know that, how do I approach this? I don't know that there's anything, it's just an awareness. How about that? something that has come across my desk that is worth noting. And that is the city of Airway Heights has requested to the Washington State Building Code Council that they change their building code for single-family residents to include fire sprinklers. And I realize they have their own fire department within their control of their city. We don't. But only bring it to our attention because it's kind of one of those. I've been having this discussion over all the way back to when I was in the Spokane Home Builders Association, in pushing back against this type of an action to be put into a building code as it relates to single family. And in my mind, it's just one of those, the closer it gets to home, the more potential it has to get added to the discussion. I don't know how better to say that, how much nicer to say that. So my only question is this something that a concerned resident of our city should take to our fire department, or is this something that the city should maybe be part of the discussion with the fire department? I'm not sure. In my opinion is no way should this happen. So I don't know where to go next to, and maybe it's a non-issue.
Yeah, maybe if you don't say anything, they'll never think about it.
Well, that doesn't work that way. It never works that way.
Oh,
They'll make a law.
oh.
I mean, maybe we can have an offline conversation. Similar to the comment I made earlier about the legislature, there's all kinds of code related bills floating around. And I don't know if Airway Heights' position is related to a current proposed bill or if it's separate from
This is
that.
initiated by their city.
Okay, yeah, let's talk offline because I'll be happy
Bring
to.
awareness that it's out there and it's not good. If you want to have affordable housing, that's not the way to do it.
Yeah.
Never be able to afford a house with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, all right, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
get it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, I have a question. I think everybody remembers we had in the last election, we voted on initiative 2066. This was the bill or the initiative addressing natural gas. My understanding is that the State Building Code Council has yet to include the provisions of I-2066 in the state codes. They're resisting that. Do you have any information on that?
Do you?
I know that it's currently being challenged and it's going through a legal challenge right now.
That's pretty much it.
We've
Yeah.
had conversations in the climate chapter about those types of things and being very careful about any kind of language that encourages fuel switching, and the Department of Commerce passively encouraged us to either stray away from those types of goals and policies or consult very closely with our legal counsel before we do that. So I don't believe that any of those are slated to be included in our climate chapter. Based on that.
Nor has the city taken any action on that?
Not that I'm aware of.
So we're just status quo with the previous?
I believe we're in kind of a wait and see situation of how this is gonna move through the legal challenge and see where it goes.
So I could say this, I was part of a Zoom meeting where the building department in Moses Lake. Is that a county or is that a city? City.
Correct.
Yep, they have adopted their own policy because they are getting no direction regarding that matter. So they've shared it. I brought it up a couple meetings ago to see if our city was going to have a discussion about it. So I've just kind of been waiting to share that until that decision has been made, which is, I don't know if that's not our scope.
Interesting. So we have an election, we vote, and then they decide maybe they're not gonna do something.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah, let's not get over into politics, okay? Any other comments? Entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye, we are done. Thank you, everyone.